What's up, everybody? I'm Thomas J. Bellezza, and welcome to another episode of The Right Mindset. This is episode 1 of season 4. I can't believe we have gotten this far, mostly because I'm lazy. So for me to do something so consistently and constantly, I deserve an award. And I should get an award, but I'm the only one who would give it to me. But that doesn't mean that the guest who's here today doesn't want to be here. She told me, hey, look, you're paying me money. I'm happy to be here to support a friend. I said, great. So I'd like to introduce to you Power Glitch 87. What's up, Power Glitch 87? How are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. You know, before we get our show started, I always like to give the guests this chance to kind of tell the audience a little bit about who they are. So why don't you do that?
Hi, everyone. I'm Power Glitch 87. I do music. I do cosplay. And I also read tarot cards.
Oh,
and that's about it.
you can't go wrong with tarot cards.
No.
Now, what is the least what is the way somebody says tarot cards that aggravates you the most?
I'm not really bothered by it, but I've definitely heard people say tarot cards. And I mean, that's fine. Like, do you? It's fine.
Tarot cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, they repeat themselves when you talk to them. So what do you see in the future? What do you see in the future? I just said that, tarot. Like a parrot? I don't know. I don't do jokes. No.
You should.
Well, you know, if someone writes them down for me, maybe I'll say them. I have no filter, you know. So I don't know if you've ever watched or listened to the show. I know I don't. But, you know, still with that said, you know, we like to talk about writing and like the craft of writing. But, you know, this season I'm trying to bring on fans of writing and fans of genres. So, you know, to get really thrown into it, you know, what kind of genres really get your fancy going? Like what makes you go to the bookstore and say, you know, I don't know what I'm picking up today, but I know what area I'm walking to?
I would have to say anything horror, fantasy, and anything to do with spirituality, really.
Okay. Now, when you say spirituality, are you talking more like, you know, the nonfiction books where they sort of like self-exploring you know, spirituality, or are you talking like fantasy books that kind of focus on that spirituality?
Both.
Oh, all right. What draws you to those things? What are the elements of those genres that really pulls you in?
I think with horror, it's a mixture between. How do I explain it? Okay, so with horror, I just find it so exciting because you're coming up with something totally okay, like Stephen King. You know, he uses his fears, nightmares he's had, things like that, and I find that fascinating. But also, sometimes people are telling stories about things they've actually seen in real life that are just terrifying. And especially when you dive into other cultures and stuff, you know, there's certain beings, creatures, cryptids, things like that. But also, my favorite thing is the whole idea of, you know, human beings being the monster, kind of Scooby-Doo.
Which is the most realistic element.
I love Scooby-Doo.
I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you dang kids. You can't go. Casey Kasem plays Shaggy. You know, he played Shaggy's voice for a long time. This is Casey Kasem. Welcome to Casey Kasem's Top 10 Countdown. I just gave my age away, and I don't care. People are like, who's Casey Kasem? Isn't it the guy from Scream? You know, the Shaggy. You know, it's true about, you know, horror. Some of the things that come out of horror though makes you really quite like, what's wrong with these authors? Like, what are they on?
Right.
To be like, what do you mean he's a clown, but he's really a spider, but he sucks on fear? Yes. Wait a minute. Why are the kids having sex in the sewers?
Right.
None of it connects, Stephen King. None of it connects. Have you ever read anything where you said to yourself, I hope that the realism in this book has never affected somebody in real life because it's so dark.
That's a great question. I I don't know. I guess I feel like everything's possible. So whenever I read something or watch a movie, whatever,
Yeah.
I really I'm just like, it could happen. And who's to say it's not real? And yeah, I mean, I do hope that people aren't going through these things,
Oh yeah.
but at the same time, I think that's why I really do enjoy horror movies, because I'm like, okay, but how would you get through that?
Yeah.
Like, I wanna see.
I mean, rule number one is walk away from the sound, not towards the sound. So
Yes.
it's like when you're home and you hear something outside, you're like, I don't need to know what's out there. I just need to
No.
know if it's in here. And if it's not, I'm
Yeah,
not looking at the monsters. I don't need it. I don't want it. You know?
exactly. I mind my own business.
Yep.
I don't. That could be out there.
A lot of horror thrillers, even fantasy, still stem from something real in somebody's life. Like they've experienced something. I know as a writer, I love to work through the things that really affected me emotionally in life and kind of turn those into stories or triumphs through tragedy or trauma, to work through it, and hopefully it connects with someone else. And
Yeah.
is with that said, is that something that you've dealt with in life that makes you that pulls you to those genres, to horror, to kind of like you have these traumas, but you almost feel like you're working through it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that also is a very big reason why I enjoy that. Since I was little, I've seen certain things that you can't explain. Sometimes people are just like, yeah, okay, sure. But it when I watch horror or fantasy, it does make me feel like, yeah, maybe I'm not so crazy.
Mhm.
It makes me feel more normal. It makes me feel more validated.
Mm-hmm.
um but yeah, same, yeah, with trauma, that's definitely a big thing. I have DID.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be called multiple personality disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's definitely a big thing. I've definitely watched some movies where I've watched it and I'm like, why do I feel so connected to this movie?
Yeah.
And I didn't click until I was diagnosed and learned about it. And
Mm-hmm.
then I was like, oh, wow, okay, this makes so much more sense to me now.
Yep. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like,
And once you get diagnosed, it's the same thing with people with borderline personality disorder. Fatal Attraction is one of the is it Fatal Attraction with Glenn Close? Glenn Close, I believe, is yeah, she with the killing of the rabbit.
I
So
think so, right?
yeah, with yeah, Kurt Douglas or Michael Douglas, whatever. Um, in that movie, it was before they actually figured out that borderline personality was a thing, and people watch that movie and they look back and they go, "Yeah, she had borderline personality." So like something I study because I have people that I know with it, and I wanted to understand it. And you go back and you watch these movies and you realize they are quoted in these books. They're like,
Wow.
"Yeah, this is what," and it's interesting. I live with chronic depression.
Right.
So when I see depression depicted positively, and I say that as in like they're not using it as a trope, but they're
Yeah.
showing you even the dark side of depression in a way that's real, I
Yep.
appreciate that. And if like you said, you watch it and you're like, this feels familiar, but like I don't understand why it would, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
Like, why is this clicking so well right now?
called the doc, what's going on over here? I don't
Yeah.
understand. Yeah, was it scary feeling that kind of connection to your symptoms before you were diagnosed?
um, yes and no. No, because I really didn't know I had it. I thought everyone had voices in their head until I told my therapist, and then she was like, no. And I had to sit there for a minute and be like, oh, okay. So that's not a normal thing. Good to know.
Well, I mean, a lot of authors might say we all have did then because,
Right.
characters talk to us and like, we don't want to do that. We want to do this.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I've seen some movies where I'm like, yeah, it does. It kind of does scare you a little bit because you're like, why is this character sitting so well with me? And
Yeah.
why do I feel seen even though I don't fully understand it? It's like,
Have you?
I don't know. It's like putting a piece of the puzzle.
Well, have you ever watched the movie where you're like, this is just not what it is? This is not did in any sense that this is just a play on multiple personality syndrome. Have you? And you're just like, why? Like, why make this movie?
Yeah. I think that's kind of almost every movie to do with the ID.
Mm-hmm.
The one movie or the one show, actually, Moon Knight.
Okay, yeah.
I loved that show. It made me feel so seen, so represented. I found that it was, besides the whole, magical,
But that's
whatever.
real.
When you break it down, uh, I felt like it was the most accurate. Like just the simple, innocent things of, oh, I made a date with someone, and oh, I'm going to go to the date, but now it's 5 days later,
Yeah.
and they're
Yeah.
mad at you, and you're like, I don't even know what happened.
Yeah, like
It's
we had a date. Who
yeah,
are you?
exactly.
No, again, I don't live with DID, but I did like how they showed its progression of how it becomes something a part of you, where it becomes, in some cases, not all cases, but it becomes a protective element. It's a switch to defend you or keep you safe. So I thought that was really nice that they did that. I think in Split they went a little too far.
I haven't even watched that movie. I was going to, but sometimes watching those movies is really triggering to me,
Mm-hmm.
and so I just can't even get through them.
Yeah.
But I know in the DID community, majority of people hate that movie. They're
Yeah.
just like, it's it, because so many people think we're monsters as it is. They're like, oh, you have a serial killer inside of you, or you have demons, and it's just like,
You're like,
sure.
I would kill you openly. I'm not a serial killer. I will just kill you. I don't need a personality to start secretly. Why would I dig holes and travel to different cities? I'm not a serial killer.
Right. Just give me a reason.
Yeah. That's why I tell people I can never become a murderer, because with chronic depression, I have the thoughts, but I don't have the motivation.
There you go.
I'm like, it's light outside. I'm comfortable in my blanket. I know it's 6 o'clock in the afternoon, but
I feel that.
yeah, we're yeah. There we go. There we
Yeah.
go. Let's jump back to some books, though. What's a book that you've recently read that really made you think? But the caveat is that it was everything you're not interested in, everything that you were hoping to read. It ended up being nothing that you expected. Like, for example, let's say you went for a book because there was an idea of diversity or a specific theme you felt would be in there because of the title or the cover. Right. And then you read the book and it was nothing that you thought it would be, but it really made you think. It really pulled you in. Have you read a story like that of late? Other than my books? No.
That's a great question. And I cannot think of any of them right now.
Could be a movie or a show too. Anything, story,
Yeah, I know. I'm just like, really have no idea.
Well, Ring of Power. No, I went in thinking it was going to be a good show, and it completely got me thinking. Why do I jump to these things?
I feel like the only thing I can think of would be like porn. Some titles you're just like,
Yeah, you're like, oh, what is?
what's happening?
In fact, I only click on porn titles that are I'm like, what is that? And then I'm like, oh, this is. I didn't.
It's true. Sometimes you'll like click and then it's like a whole story and you're just like sitting there for the story and you're like, wow, good. I want to
So
see where
she's
this
a
goes next.
wolf.
Right? Does she get the painting in the end?
What's with the pterodactyl?
Right.
Well, this is definitely not Lord of the Rings. I clicked the wrong button.
Yeah.
I knew the actor who played Gollum in the Lord of the G String movie. You know, the parody. He used to come to my theater all the time on Long Island, and people were like, you know what that is? And I was like, I don't want to say I do. So why don't you tell me who he is? Because if I tell you, that's telling you about me.
That's true.
Yeah, so I had to shake his hand like, oh, I didn't know. I had no idea. And he's like, I see your name on the bill, though. You know.
That's beautiful.
It is, right? You know, you just meet new people, different people, and it's all worlds of them. Now, you're a creative. You're musically creative. You're a content creator. You explore the beauty of sexuality and all these other things. Yeah. When you approach these creative elements, do you go through emotion first, or do you think of a story you're trying to tell through these messages and then allow the art to work through that message?
I guess it depends, because sometimes, I will have the emotion first. And then I'm like, okay, how do I tell the story of this emotion? Or sometimes I create to release that emotion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes it's the other way, where I'm just like, I really want to, tell this story or bring more light to this certain topic. So I want to, like I did a DID photo shoot and I did a depression photo shoot. After my mom passed away. And so I was just like, I really kind of want to show visually and make like a story. With music, I only have 2 songs out right now, but I have so many songs that I've written. I love storytelling. It's always different. It's always different, because sometimes I do go in with a clear, this is the topic, this is the memory I want to, touch on. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'm just like, I'm just feeling really upset right now or super happy. So I'm just gonna see where that brings me.
Yeah, just play with the words and stuff like that.
Yeah.
When you do photo shoots or photo sets of ideas, is that something you'll sit down and write ideas about first, or will you just sort of have them in your head and let them mull around and then kind of start trying to put them together by outfits, et cetera, et cetera?
I usually just have it in my head, and then I will just go grab some clothes. Or if it's a certain character I'm cosplaying, I only cosplay characters that I actually know. That way I can, tell the story with the images.
Yep. I noticed you haven't dressed up like me yet.
I know. Got to be the next one.
All right, because I worked hard at this beard.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm jealous.
I lend it out on the weekends if you're interested. It comes off. It's like Zach Galifianakis' beard, I wanted to look like my mother. She's Sicilian, so I was. When I was younger, people be like, "Oh, what you're not?" I'd be like Italian, and my mom would slap me. You're Sicilian, damn it! I'm like, whoa.
Like, okay.
I was like, what's the difference? Speaking about nationalities, this is a funny story. So I was recently talking to my insurance company, and they're like, "Oh, we noticed that your nationality is not marked down. Would you feel comfortable talking about it?" And I go, honestly, talking about that, I'm comfortable with it, but my logical brain, my deductive reasoning is confused by the options, because there's more than one. And they're like, well, there's more than one nationality and ethnicity. I go, no, there's not. And they're like, what do you mean? I go, well, where did the human race come from? And they're like, well, the origin of the human race is Africa. I go, so that would make me, along with everyone else, African, right? And she goes, yeah, well, that's not how it works. And I go, well, are we talking generationally? Like, what, my
True.
ethnicity is a generational thing? And she goes, yeah. I go, well, then how many generations back am I allowed to go? Because at one point or another, Sicily was Greek. It was African. It was Mongolian. It was like, and she's like, oh my God. And she started like, she was questioning life. And she was like, I always identified as African, but I didn't realize we were all related. Like, that's what she said, like on the phone. And I was like, so can I say I'm African? She's like, I'm going to say you're African. She put it down as African. And I was like, thank you. She's like, well, logically, you proved your point. Like, I don't see. Right. And she's like, some are lighter, some are not. And that's in Africa too. So, this skinism and colorism and, dark skin, light skin. So just, you have less pigmentation, I guess. And I go, yeah. My brother's a dark man. I'm a light man. My cousin looks like she's, and she was laughing so hard. And the reason I kind of actually I'm going into that thought is, I love your strong approach on that, and you add conversation to the diversity. And as a fantasy writer, I write in a world, because you brought up culture earlier on, so I kind of want to talk about that and get your perspective on it, and of course respectively. So obviously, if I'm crossing a line or saying something, please just pause me.
Okay.
I literally, me, I'm a heart. I mean no disrespect. So my approach to writing is I took out the earth element and just created my own world and my own cultures. And in my world, I have two suns. So my brain was like, people would be darker naturally because two suns, unless it's Star Wars where I'm like, how are they surviving on that desert with two suns? There's no way these white people would, just naturally, you have too much vitamin D, So when you read books that are fantasy that have, like, for example, in my situation, I have darker skinned characters. They're obviously not African.
Right.
They can't be. They're not Dominican. They can't be. They're not, right? I'm with a Puerto Rican Dominican woman, and she's like, I think you're safe. But, I kind of want to, what are your thoughts when you read books about fantasy worlds where they touch on characters that aren't blue, green, and orange? They're just have darker skin, or they're tanner, or they're lighter tan, or they're brown or olive. Like, what are your thoughts on that? If they obviously are not touching on the cultural elements of Earth, how do you feel when you read those books?
It's a great question. It does make me think of Star Wars, where people were like freaking out, like a black stormtrooper. Like, there's all these other beings and different, someone who's blue, and that's what you're upset about.
How can he be black? How can Greedo be green?
Put more black people in space.
Yeah, I know, right?
Put them everywhere.
You and especially in Tatooine, you would, like, there's two suns, like, they're just, you can't survive.
Right.
You'd get skin cancer. You're like, it's beautiful out.
Yeah.
Man. But culturally speaking, sometimes there's a play on cultural elements. Like, there's a lot of some would say native elements in my book, in my world, but that's because they live in nature, and they worship animals and nature gods that actually exist in my world. Like, gods are a part of that. They walk around, they're not just made up, they are made up, but they're not, you can see one and be like, oh my God, the god of whatever. And, some of the pushback sometimes is like, well, you don't understand the culture, or you're not Native American, so you can't talk about those things. But I never address Native American Earth themes. Right. So as a reader and somebody who likes to talk about diversity and culture and is very vocal about it, what are your thoughts on authors, myself included, that touch on elements of culture that might be earthbound, but manipulate it for the fantasy, or trying to expand on ideas, or maybe even mold different ideas into one. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a hard one because it's like when you break it down, the person writing it though is from Earth and is taking some inspiration, perhaps even if it's subconsciously, from different cultures and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. Uh, I always feel like, for me personally, I feel like if you are reaching out to someone maybe from that culture and like working with them as you're writing your story,
Mm-hmm.
and um just to make sure that, because I feel like sometimes we might not know something about a culture and then we're like, oh well, what if this happened, and then it's like, oh, that's a real thing,
Yeah.
and and you don't want to accidentally be like, oh oops, and like, oh, I'm not trying to talk on that because I'm not from that culture.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always think trying to do as much research as you can and get people that are actually from different cultures and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's okay. So I'm a spiritual person. I don't have a religion, but I do like to learn about all religions and all different practices. And I do find that even on my own path, sometimes I end up, yeah, getting certain inspiration from different things.
Yeah.
And so it is important for me to make sure that I'm not, overstepping at all. But yeah, I don't know.
Well,
That is,
well, with that said, with that
yeah,
said, let's say there's an Irish person, an Irish
right,
author, and they're writing about multiple gods, like almost with the Greek element to it, but they're not Greek gods. There's just
right.
they have 30 gods, and there's not a god like Zeus, but there's a god that is the leader. Are they prone to the same responsibility because they chose to just make multiple gods instead of like a Christian God, where it's just one God in three parts, as if it's a sandwich.
Right.
Um, but like, would someone who's Irish be responsible to go, well, the Greeks have multiple gods. I don't, should I go and speak to Greek people to make sure that I'm not offending their culture if there's similarities or crossovers, even though all my gods have none of their powers or their presence. Like there's not a god of thunder and a god of
Right.
lightning. There's no titans. There's no. It's just I have 20 gods, but there's a hierarchy. There's the king of the gods and the. Would you feel that they would also have the responsibility to reach out to the Greek community?
Um, that is also a great question. I'm not really sure. I think it definitely comes down to, like when you think of power dynamics and society,
Mm-hmm.
obviously black and brown people, we're at the bottom. We get the shit end of the stick.
Yeah.
And so, white people obviously benefit more.
The YTs.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know my lingo.
Right. So it's I don't think it's always going to be the same for every situation,
Yeah.
you know, but I definitely think if it is a white person touching on something to do with a black or brown
Culture.
person's culture, yeah, uh, Asian culture also. Um, yeah, I think it's definitely. I think it's also important though to, like, I think they should ask themselves, like, why do I want to go that route instead
Mm-hmm.
of maybe touching more on something that comes from my own background
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as well. Because I feel like in general, white people are always taking a little this and that from, especially Black people, with our style, the things we say,
Yeah, yeah.
music, things like that, and then slapping their face and their label on it.
Taking it over.
And yeah. And I think it is very important though to reach out or pay someone for their time. If you're like, hey, yeah, I do think that this does have Native American, ties. So I do want to pick someone's brain. Like, it
Yeah.
would be great to like, hey, can I pay you for your time to, your emotional labor on this, to educate me more on these things? But I think it is hard though when it is fantasy, because fantasy can be anything.
Yeah, I
Like
mean,
you
if people
said.
live on the plains, that doesn't make them Native Americans,
Right.
and I think that's the hard line, or the soft line, because it's like, where does it go from it's a part of what I'm thinking of versus I'm taking away the purity of a culture that wouldn't necessarily exist in this world. And
Right.
like whenever I write stories, I always write from a human perspective first. I go, what is the emotional truth here? What is the conflict and the trauma? And then I start dressing it up. The way I like when I consult clients like writers, I say to them, I go, look, if you don't have a strong skeletal system, which is basically the foundation of the story, it doesn't matter how big your muscles are, what color skin you have, and what clothes you wear on that skin. Like you don't want a story to be the clothes they wear. You don't want to be the story, the culture they use. It's like if, and I know if I wrote a Japanese story where it was samurais and I just wanted to write samurais in a town and they have swords, like that story shouldn't be written by me.
Right.
If that's my purpose, if I'm like, I want to write a story about samurais, like that's not the story I should be writing. But if I write about the struggles of war, or that structure where the shogun had order in the town and they had rank, and eventually that rank was taken from them by outsiders, that story I can write,
Right.
because I'm tackling human things.
Right.
I'm just not starting off with their samurai. Like
Right.
that's the
Right.
part I think crosses the line. Again, if I'm like, I want to write a story about Native Americans and them hunting buffalo, like now I'm not in the realm of I should be writing that.
Right.
But if I'm writing about the struggle of people and
Yep.
living off the land, and family dynamics, and learning, believing that nature and themselves are actually the gods put them there, now I'm in the realm of I can write that story.
Yeah.
And I think if authors of any ethnicity started at the core of an idea and not the outside of an idea. It's the same
Right.
thing with dinosaurs. Like that's a boring story to go, it'd be great, a story about dinosaurs and they're attacking people. Like Jurassic Park doesn't work because there's dinosaurs. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a deeper story
Yeah.
about that's why Jurassic Park has lasted as long as it has, because it's not about dinosaurs. Because if it was, 65 million, that movie that came out would have done better.
Right.
The one with Adam Driver. Like people were like, dinosaurs, I'm in. No, they were just like, this is a crappy movie.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Sharknado did well, not because there's sharks. I mean, sharks and tornadoes is a thing,
Yeah.
but
But the
there was
story.
some. Yeah.
Yeah.
Though they definitely started off with, it'd be a great movie, a tornado with sharks. And they're like, we need Tara Reid.
I
She'd sell
love
tickets.
those.
But what do you agree with that? Do you feel that's a good starting point for authors of all ethnicities to like
Yeah.
look at their stories?
Yeah, definitely getting to the core of it, for sure. Yeah, because you do have some people who are just like, yeah, I want samurais.
Samurais have
Like,
swords. This would be great. I like the top knot.
you're just like, okay, but like, no.
I know. Well, I grew up studying martial arts. And
Yeah.
funny story, my teacher, my first martial arts teacher was in Taekwondo, or as I call it, ballet. And and I can say that because I was in. He was from Korea,
Yeah.
South Korea. Um, and he spoke in Spanish, which was the greatest. He's like, "All right, he had that voice, like the traditional, Korean voice, and he go,
Yeah.
"Let's count to 10," and he go, "Uno, dos, tres, cuatro," and like his voice would change, like, And I was a kid, I was maybe like 8, and I'm like, so I'd go home. My father was in Vietnam, so he at least knows like the Asian dialect doesn't sound like Spanish,
Right.
and I'm like, oh, I learned how to count to 10 in Korean today, Dad. He goes, oh, let me hear it. I was like, uno, dos, tres. He's like, son, that is not Korean, you know. Um, but I remember as I got older, one of the interesting conversations that came up, especially when I started studying Bruce Lee, because obviously you're in martial arts. He revolutionized martial arts, so of course it's unfamiliar to not be a fan of his if you're in martial arts.
Yeah.
And I learned that some of the struggles he had as an Asian teaching martial arts to non-Asians was what got him into a lot of trouble. But that was something me and my friends were dealing with in our teens because I am pale.
Right.
And they'd be like, you shouldn't be learning martial arts, especially from an Asian teacher. That would be what the Asian students would say. And, obviously it vanished more. Like once I started doing Aikido and everything, and like my Japanese sensei, like it was amazing. I didn't feel like that struggle, but it was interesting back in the 80s where because I was not Asian, the other students would be like, technically you shouldn't really be here. Like you shouldn't be, like, it was weird. Like now in that situation, even talking about authors and stuff like that, do you feel that's an attack on the culture by trying to learn that style and trying to learn, the defensive moves and just appreciate the body in itself? What are your thoughts on that?
Um, I don't think there's like a clear answer on it because I think it is different for every culture.
Mhm.
Some cultures are more like, yes, we definitely want you to, do these things with us. And then there's certain things in certain cultures where they're like, yeah, this is open to anybody. And then there's certain things that they're like, okay, but this is like really, this is a closed practice or
Yeah,
a
yeah,
closed thing just for us. So yeah, it's hard because it does depend on what it is, what culture,
yeah.
who's doing what.
Who's doing what? Yeah, but if the teacher's Korean from Korea
Right,
teaching it, even his daughter was one of she was like 15 or 16,
right.
and beautiful woman, beautiful soul too. She was like so nice. It was amazing. Because like in an aggressive environment, you would think everyone's just like kill, but no, you're like, oh, there's laughter here. All right, I feel comfortable.
Right,
Because I'm the first person to make a joke when a fist is swung. Like, whoa, hey,
right,
I love elephants.
right.
Please don't hurt me. So like, it was welcoming from the teacher standpoint, and even his daughter. But it was just like the other students that were like more my age, 8, 9, 10, and
Yeah,
even my friend who was half Spanish and half German. Um, was my best friend like my whole life. I still know. And even he had to persecute. It's like, hey, even you shouldn't be learning. You're not, like, you're taking away spots from our culture. And I was like, it was the 80s though, and I'm a kid, and I'm just like, I just want
right.
to learn how to do front kicks.
I mean, in the '80s though, martial arts. Yeah, I mean, like all the movie, it was like,
The
it was
Karate
just,
Kid.
yeah, it exploded. Like,
Yeah.
it really did.
That came out after I started. I actually joined because of my friend, the friend he was there first, and he was like, it's great. Like you learn how to use your body. You feel better, and I was like, oh, I'm into that. And
Right,
uh, that was the. What's funny is I actually moved away from the violent because I did kempo and I did taekwondo.
right,
I moved away from that because I'm a more peaceful person, and that's why I enjoyed Aikido, that was the final style I joined. Um, because it's a passive style. It's about redirecting energy and everything like that. And that's sort of how I look at life. I'm like, we're supposed to be redirecting energy and being one with each other, and no one owns this spot. Like, if you want it, I don't care. Like, take it over. Just don't hit me. Just don't hit
Right.
me.
Just don't
That's all I care. You want to stand here, fine, but just don't hit me. That's
right.
um, so obviously over the years, my stance on violence has changed. So I joined for front kicks and being in shape, and I ended up going. It's got too violent for me. Um, but like I said, it was much more accepting in my 30s than it was, or my late 20s actually, early 30s. I'm young. Than it was in the 80s it's always interesting when I see that kind of, not that I felt like, oh, I was persecuted in my life. Like, I wasn't,
Right.
I'm not feeling what like my girlfriend feels, or like when I was with an African Puerto Rican woman for like 5 years, and I could tell you what I experienced with her from other people, but I'll never
Yeah.
have her experience. But like, what I'm saying is, I didn't feel that when I was in the school, but it was interesting that I was
Right.
being told you shouldn't be here,
Right.
like get out of here. So sometimes in the author community, it feels like that too, where people are like, you shouldn't be writing this, and I'm like, I'm not writing that. I'm writing this emotional relationship story about somebody being torn from their family and being raised in another family. And one of the things I've learned, which is very interesting as a writer, is I have people reading my book, like alpha readers, to kind of give me like some feedback.
Right.
And the majority of them, when I explain to them that there's no white people in my book, like there's like maybe a small group of light skinned people, but that's because they're not from that world. They actually got sucked into the world. And they're like, oh, I pictured the main character as like a white guy, and that they were like raised by these Indians, these Native Americans. And I go, none of that is accurate. There are no Native Americans, because there's no America.
Right.
And I go, there are no white, but there are also no black people.
Right.
They're from Nordragus, so they're Nordragian.
Right.
But they are dark skinned because there's two suns, and their minds are blown. But I also noticed that people from a different background, because I have other people from different backgrounds reading, they see the characters as themselves. So some of my Puerto Rican friends, some of my Dominican friends that are reading it, they instantly go, oh yeah, no, I figured he was black, or I figured he was dark skinned. I think that's interesting. Do you run into that with your friends of all nationalities, and when they're talking about stories that they're reading, and when they find out that they were seeing the character as something it wasn't, like what kind of situations do you get into with that? Like, how do those conversations go?
Um. Oh, what was I just thinking about? God. I can't believe I just forgot it. I was just thinking of something. Maybe if I talk about it,
So
I'll
yeah, let it
remember.
out. Let it out.
But it was making me think about how there was a movie and there was like a lot of men who kind of didn't understand that it was talking about like the patriarchy.
Yeah, like
But
that was the
they
underlining
took it
theme.
they took it in a totally different way, made it about like themselves,
Yeah.
and saw the characters in a different way. And I was just like, that is interesting though, because someone can write a story and be like, okay, this character is clearly about these things,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But I think people will always try to find a way, not even if they're trying, they will always somehow,
Their biases.
yeah, they will
Yep.
start to relate it to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
especially if they have things in common with this character, no matter where the character's from, looks
Yep.
like.
And
And
good writing does
yeah,
that.
and then they end up kind of putting their like own spin on it, but it also just reminds you that everyone does have their own perspective and sees things their own way. And it's just it's so interesting because I feel like sometimes we can try really hard to be like, no, this is exactly what I want the reader to think or understand about this
Yep.
character, but still someone else, you could be like, hey, read this, and then
It does.
they're just like, oh, this is
Yep.
how I see it, and you're like, I never even would have thought of it from
Yeah, I gotta
way.
change my words.
Yeah. Yeah.
But one of the things that I appreciated about hearing them, like each person being like, "Oh, I thought they were away. I thought they were there. I was there," is that they were connecting to the characters, and then the aesthetic was it didn't matter.
Right.
It's not like they destroyed the story because they saw them as it because the people reading that were like one of my really close Puerto Rican friends. She was reading. She was like, "Oh, I thought he was dark skinned Puerto Rican," like. And I was like, "Really?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I go, What made you say that?" And they're like, "Well, some of the struggles, some of the emotional cues, the character was interacting with the parental figure. Like I just felt like I was reading a story I've experienced. Like I've experienced those emotions." And I'm like,
Right.
"Oh, interesting, interesting," because that's the point. Again,
Yeah.
going back to you want core,
Right.
and then everything else doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter that the characters of the world are dark skinned. Like, that's the least interesting element to
Right.
any story. Is it's like writing the quintessential strong female character that has no depth. The strong female character doesn't make her interesting. The strong character is the one who perseveres, that can find solutions, can be defeated but isn't broken, can work through, can command a room through earning through even discrimination, but being like, that doesn't stop me.
Right.
It's the same thing with a strong male character. Like, I love an 80s film, don't get me wrong. Arnold Schwarzenegger going in killing everybody.
Love it.
I get it.
I love
I
it.
get it. Right.
Yeah.
But Twins was more interesting to me than Commando.
Right.
Because there was depth and there was vulnerability, and even though he's a strong guy, he was sensitive, and he just he wanted family, and that to me is more powerful than shooting everybody on the scene. And in Commando, it's the same 8 people because they could only afford the same 8 stunt people, so they just kept killing the same people. But that actually brings me to this really interesting moment. I consider it interesting in my writing career. I was hired to write a screenplay.
Yeah.
And before I go into that short story, there was this author. Uh, he wrote a concept for a movie, and it was about females and this life with the female's life, and but it was a guy who came up with the idea, and he came to me and he goes, "I don't want to write this because I'm not a guy, I'm not a girl, I'm a dude. Do you know any writers that are?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." So I reached out to a couple female writers, and they all wrote back, says, "I'm not going to work on a part, anything that a guy came up with, because they're not women." And I was like,
Right.
"Well, he wants you to take what he came up as an idea and filter it through your experiences, and wants you to write it. It's just a
Right.
concept. Like, he just outlined an idea. Like, he didn't
Right.
write anything. He just wrote an
Right.
idea." And I thought that was interesting because they were like, "I don't want anything to do with it because
Right.
he shouldn't be attached to it." And I was a little weirded out by that because I'm like, but he's giving you the caveat,
Right.
the carte blanche to make it yours.
Right.
You know, and he's going to pay you. And they were like, "No." So I had an opportunity. I got hired to write a script, and I brought that up to. It was a woman,
Hmm.
and she says, "Look, this is a female story." But it wasn't really a female story. It was a story about something with core, right? And I said, "Do you really want me writing it though? Because I'm a dude." And she's
Yeah.
like, "Well, everybody says that you're the person to go to. Like, you're the one who writes character. Like, you're good at character." And I says, "All right, I'll write the first draft, but if you end up wanting someone else to write it, or have a woman, whatever." She's like, no, you do your thing. I wrote the first draft. I sent it to her. She goes, her and her mother cried through the whole thing. And then she started showing all her female friends the script, and they thought a woman wrote it.
Right.
So she came back to me and she told me all this, and she goes, you know, what did you do? Like, how did you capture it? And I go, I wrote people. That's all I did. I didn't focus. Having boobs doesn't make you a woman.
Right.
It doesn't make the woman interesting.
Right.
It's this thing inside you, these fears, these strengths, these loves, these pains, these sacrifices, you know, all these dreams of success, all that makes a soul. And I go, that's all I focused on. I just gave them situations and I said, what is their position? How do I challenge that position? What is the consequence or the reaction to that? And then does it change their position afterwards? And she goes, oh, well, you really did a great, you brought their voices out. I go, because you could take their bodies away and put a guy, and it would still have the same. It would read slightly different,
right?
Just because it would have that masculine energy. Because when you look at a guy, you think masculine. When you look at a woman, you think that. Right? That's just bias, right? But like we were saying, you know, somebody reads it, they're like, oh, there's a. But if you take all that away, you strip all that away, there's still these humans, these and I always thought that was interesting. Like, I'm not a fan of books where you're reading it for, like, you know, this is about, you know, a Chinese person, you know, like, that's not an interesting story to me. Just like if it was like, this is an Italian, here's a mob book, not interested. Like, I'm not interested in like Goodfellas wasn't great because it's about the mafia,
right?
You know. And do you ever find books where, like, you know, you're going in and you're just like, it's like, I just hope this doesn't end up just being face value, and then it does, and you're just reading it and you're like, you're killing the narrative by writing this. You know, or watching a movie, you're like, what do you do? Like, this, you're killing the story. Like, you know, do you feel there's anything that recently came out that did that, where you were like, this is a great opportunity to tell a wonderful story, and then it just was like, as an example,
a helicopter.
They're coming to get us. They're coming to get us. I don't want to get into you know, The Last Jedi with Rey Skywalker, but that's what I'm talking about. Like a movie where you're like, oh, this is a great opportunity for representation, and then they just took away the story, and it was just about the face value. What's the most recent thing you experienced that was like that kind of actually angered you?
I know. I'm just like, I don't know. I think it's because I tend to with characters, I tend to connect with a lot of characters very deeply. Mm-hmm. So sometimes, you know, I find that some of my friends might take a show or something as just face value, and they're like, that was whatever. And I'm like, but didn't you pick up on how this character was feeling this? And so when this happened, and they're like, oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, because there's more to it. But I don't know. I think it is very important, though, because some stories are meant to be told, though, like about, you know, if someone comes from a certain background or a certain culture, mm-hmm. Their struggles, things like that, because not everyone is experiencing that, and that's their story to tell and to bring light to and attention to. Same with women. Yeah, a story about a woman and whatever she's going through. I start thinking about the Barbie movie. Did you see that?
I didn't get to see. It was on my list to see, though.
It's so good. It's really good. It's
because I live in a Barbie world, you know.
Who doesn't?
I'm in Barbie world, living in a Barbie. Hey, Ken, let's go.
I love it. But okay, so I won't spoil anything for you, but you should definitely watch that movie. It's definitely it's just so much more about, oh, toys that are real.
Yeah.
It's like those core elements that make them real in their experiences. And but anyways, uh yeah, I was thinking about what you said about the man who wrote the story, and then the women being like, oh, well, we don't want to touch it because a man wrote it. And I think,
Well, remember, he
I mean,
didn't write it. He just wrote like a
no,
paragraph of what it
right,
was, and then was like, "You write it."
right. So just like the bare bones kind of,
Yeah, it was like
here's a plot line that's kind of cool.
yeah, it was like, what would be interesting, this story, because it's about I think it was about his sister or his mother or something like that. And he's like, but I don't have a female voice as a writer. So and that's what I said to him. And they're like, no, he can't do it because a guy, it's a guy's idea, and they shouldn't be touching female voices. And then my argument was, it's your chance to write a
Right,
movie written by a woman about women. Like
right,
it's not it's not like his voice wasn't in it at all. He didn't give any direction. It wasn't like a draft, and he was like, can you clean it up? They had complete creative control over the representation of it.
right.
But at the same time, that gives that, what's that argument that comes from that? Well, does that mean guys can't write women at all? And it's like, well, like, there's women in stories. Like, I don't know about you, but I had a mother.
Women story.
You know what I'm saying? Like, if I'm writing about a boy, he's gonna have a mother, you
Right.
know, or father, or whatever. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen Jane the Virgin. It's like a television
No.
show. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. It basically takes a telenovela, puts it in a real life, and then she sees the world through the telenovela, and she's a writer, and it's really great. It's really great.
Interesting.
It's so good, and it mixes, like, it's all it's from that Spanish world. Like, all the actors are Venezuelan, not all of them. There's different people in it, but the main actress and her family, it's a grandmother, a mother, and her,
Right.
and she has a child, and they're all Venezuelan. Beautiful, beautiful movie. But there's a moment where she has an advisor, and Jane the Virgin writes romance novels. She loves romance. She loves, she loves the telenovelas.
Yeah.
And the advisor is like what would be considered like an extreme feminist, but she's white, and she has like the curly hair. I think she's also Jewish in the show, and she basically rips apart the whole thing. And like, why is there a guy? You're not doing the Benton test. Like, there should be. And Jane is like, it's a romance. Like I need her to fall in love with a guy. And the teacher was like, why? And she's like, it's a romance.
Right.
Like, I want her to get married to this guy. So
Right.
she's like, well, this is not good. You got to rework it. So Jane's home, and she's working it, and she's trying to make her character a lesbian. She's trying to take all the guys out, like the father figure, and she's just like, this book is like, there's nothing here now. It's just like, how many different women can I bring into? Like, she's like, I need a guy. And it was just funny because, like, that's sort of like we're saying, like, well, is she allowed to even write men? And the teacher doesn't even want her writing men. Like, she's saying
Right.
having men in your book is ruining the story, and she's just like, but it's a romance.
I mean, that's so interesting too, because it's like, you obviously, if Jane isn't queer, you can't really force someone to write a queer story.
Well, the teacher wasn't saying to write a queer story,
Right.
but Jane was like, if there's no men and it's a romance, she has to fall in
Right.
love with someone. So she's
Right.
like, but she couldn't, because just
Right.
what you're saying, she wasn't queer. So she's like, I just don't,
Right.
like, I
She's like,
can't,
I can't make it work.
yeah, like, I'm in love with the guy character, and like,
Right.
so it's just, but I don't think people shouldn't write other people. That's a ridiculous argument for the author world. But again, start with the core value, and
Yeah.
I agree with you too. Stories need to be told. Certain perspectives need to be told, but start at the core. Because even if you are, a Jewish woman and you're writing a Jewish female character, that's not an interesting story yet. There's nothing interesting if that's the tagline, a Jewish female, a Jewish woman boss. Like that's not but
I'd
oh
read
no,
it
I want to tell
though.
it from my yeah, exactly. Like the
Like
whole,
I would read it, be like, "Oh, get it, girl."
yeah, go get it, yeah,
You
but
know?
that story wouldn't be Jurassic Park to you. Like you wouldn't get pulled through that narrative just because, especially if it just focused on her always like really oh, she's Jewish, she's a
Right.
CEO, like that's all it is. Like it's just her being a Jewish CEO and just being there's no struggle, we're not going deeper into who she is as a character. Like that story is not going to resonate with anyone because it can't. You can't, like
I
like
think
I'm not Jewish, but you know.
it's interesting though, because it's like I think the thing is, because what's interesting to us, might be boring to someone else, or they might not be able to connect
That's
at
true.
all.
Oh
And
yeah.
then someone else might find something the best thing in the world, and then we're like, okay, but sure, I'm happy for you.
You leave my
Glad you have
Sesame
the
Street
feeling.
alone.
But yeah, it's interesting though, because like when you mentioned, like a Jewish CEO woman, I feel like a lot of people would read that because they would also, if they're Jewish and a woman, they'd be like, "Damn, this gives me inspiration," or
Well, they'll pick it up,
yeah,
but the inspiration, like again, if the story is just
right,
focusing on that she is a
right,
Jewish woman that is a CEO and that is running a business, what's inspiring about that yet? Because remember, you can't tell people, you can't say, I'm going to inspire you. There's things I
right,
have to do that connect to you emotionally that inspire you. And like I know I've never looked at my Italian uncle and got inspired to be Italian, but the way he acts with family, his morals, his
right,
struggles, it just so happens he's Italian, but through the culture of being Italian and what he's dealing with and his loudness, now I'm following him. Now I'm
right,
seeing why I love my uncle and why I connect with him. Again, an Italian dude with a cabinet shop might get me to pick up the book. Oh, it's an Italian guy who's a carpenter. I like those things. I like being a man. I like carpentry, and I'm Italian. But
right,
if I'm reading it, it's just the Italian guy makes a cabinet in his shop that he owns. He continues to make those cabinets. He starts painting the cabinets. Like I'm not interested. Like I'm not inspired yet.
right.
You
I
know.
think I think the thing with that though is, I think any woman seeing another woman being a CEO inspired.
I mean, yes. Again, but imagine you read that book and it goes, the Jewish woman sat in her office as CEO. She
Yeah.
looked at her paperwork with no interest on what's there because she knew she had written it and it's perfect. So the Jewish woman went home to her mansion. Like
I mean,
nothing about that's
I'm
emotional though.
inspired.
Like I want to be a Jewish woman now.
Like I'm inspired. I'm like, damn. She's like,
Yeah,
my work is perfect. I got my. I'm just like,
I did it. Yeah,
yes,
but that should be the end
manifest
of the book.
this.
You know what I'm saying? Like that should be like if that's going to be that should be the end of the book. Like we should see
Right.
her journey
Right.
to getting
Right.
to
Like, how
that
did
point.
she get to be CEO?
Yeah, or even if she starts out as a CEO, what's the struggle where she gets to the
Right.
point where she knows she can trust her work? You know,
Right.
now I'm in. Now I'm inspired because that journey is happening.
Right. And
But
what is
if you
she
open
CEO of? Like, what is what?
there you go, right? So the book would pick you up, but if it doesn't tell you any of that,
Right.
you're not going any deeper. And
Right.
that story doesn't need to be told of, the cover just says Jewish CEO woman. Like that story doesn't need to be told, especially if you pick it up and it's 1 page long and it's just literally she's Jewish, a CEO, and she's right. And then you turn the page and go, she left and went home to her mansion. Like that book, that's not a story.
Right.
You
But
know what I'm saying?
I don't know.
It's a statement. It
It
literally is a
is.
statement. It's like she's Jewish, she's a CEO, she went home to her mansion. And
Yeah.
like there was no journey. So you can't connect to that emotionally, because that's how you emotionally connect things, through the journey, to your trials and tribulations, right? We support artists. Like you're highly supported because people follow your journey. They follow your trials and tribulations, and they show compassion and love, and you know they honor your quiet moments, but they you celebrate your loudness
Yeah.
in your art, right? But they wouldn't do that if you just posted on social media once saying, "This is who I am."
Right.
You wouldn't have a fan base,
Right.
and that's the point I'm just making. Is like a
Yeah.
book is not a statement. A book is a movement. It's a compilation of challenges and trials, tribulations,
Layers.
and victories. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, at Jurassic Park, if it was just like dinosaurs eating kids, all right, I'm in already, just at that. But
I know. I was just like, but now I'm sold.
I'm in. But you're not going to watch that movie a second time because you
No.
emotionally miss it.
Exactly.
You're not going to be sitting back and go, oh, that journey of the dinosaur eating the kids that all had their backs to them, and they was,
It's true though. I mean, I definitely something about a character, especially showing growth and going through different
yeah,
things or getting from point A to point B. I especially adventure movies like The Hobbit. I can just watch that over and over again. I'll just keep watching the whole thing over and over again. I don't even care. I love it so much. And it's also about like, yeah, them overcoming so many things and developing
yep,
um because I think that's important for everyone too, is to have growth and face your fears and step out of your box and
yep,
all those
and that's
things.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, it really is.
and if you talk about a story that needs to be told, let's say like a time in Harlem, and the rise of jazz and R&B during that period, like that story does need to be told. But if that story is just a statement on that time period and not a journey, there's nothing is happening. It's not an interesting story. Those
Right.
times are interesting, and that's why that story needs to be told. But again, if the book was just back in the 20s, jazz was wild in Harlem. It even pulled in Spanish Harlem to the events of R&B and this amazing life that existed. The end. Like that. Like I'm not gonna read that book again. Like I don't have an
Right.
emotional connection to that paragraph, and then it
Right.
turns to the end. There's nothing there.
Right.
So that story doesn't need to be told because it's not right. It's not doing anything. So I think earlier I kind of tried to get to this point where it's like, have you ever picked up a book or watched a movie or a television show that set up the statement of it needs to tell this story, and then when you watched it, you realized there was no substance and it was just pulling you through the statement and repeating that statement without going into anything with substance. Have you experienced that?
I can't think of a book, but I feel like randomly, you're on Netflix, Hulu, whatever,
Yep.
and you're like, I want to watch a documentary. I want to learn about something cool, but for some reason, some of them really just you're like, okay, but there's like nothing to this. You're
Yeah.
just like, hey, there's this company and they sell this thing and here's a picture of it.
And they have a CEO.
Yeah, and you're like, okay. I'm done. Yeah, great. But then you start watching another one and maybe that one's not even as good, edited as good as the other one, but the
Yep.
story, you're like, oh my God, this person really, this is who they were as a person. And
Yep.
so it might make you even fall in love with their company,
Yeah.
because you're just like, wow, this person really went through so much, or does so much for other people. And it's just, it is about the whole story, because I don't know, definitely documentaries, I love them so much, but I do find a lot of them.
It's boring. Well, it's like the movies that made us, that series. Like
Yeah.
they talk to the people involved, and you just kind of like you hear their jokes, but you also hear, like the Dirty Dancing one. You start feeling for that, and you're like, oh, this was a good episode. Like you learned a lot, and because there's depth to it. It's not just like Dirty Dancing was a movie. It was a hit in the '80s. There was dancing. Like that's not interesting.
Yeah.
It's
Like, yes, we know.
But they were right. That
Yeah.
story needs to be told. The behind the scenes need to be told, but the way
Yeah.
you tell it, I think one of the ones that I feel kind of that is like I haven't been able to get into Ahsoka because I love Ahsoka from the Clone Wars, and I love that her character journey. I loved her in Rebels, and then you're watching the live action Ahsoka, and it's like they almost took out the essence of what her journey and her story is and turned her into this stoic like empty character and also oh sorry I forgot her name, the secondary protagonist, the Mandalorian woman. I'm sorry I can't. She was great she was great in Rebels also. She was,
Right.
she had a personality, she had purpose, and she had a journey. And I just feel like that show could have been so great, especially for a show that has amazing representation from the people they cast. I mean, Rosario Dawson, she's Puerto Rican, and she's playing this amazing character. The other character, why can't I remember? Not Ezra. Well, Ezra, he's Dominican, I think, or Puerto Rican, but I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, but she's played
I
by
can.
an Asian
Shit.
character. So it's like, great. All right, we got diversity, and like, here's a wonderful opportunity to take these characters that have this full, rich history and this depth to them, and then they just made them like chess pieces.
Right.
Like they're just doing things,
Right.
and then they're creating like fake drama. Like, have you seen the show yet?
I saw, I think, the first two seasons.
No, I'm talking Ahsoka. It's just started. It's
Oh,
like on
no.
episode 4. I
No.
won't ruin it for you, but the general gist is like they make fake conflict. Like there's a moment where they're just like, "Well, she doesn't like me. Well, did you talk to her about it? No, I just know she doesn't want me involved." And you're like, first of all, this character would confront her, knowing
Yeah.
that the other character would listen.
Right.
And the whole episode was about her believing that the other person wouldn't want her to work with her. And it ends with them going, she puts on her armor and she shows up, and they don't even have a conversation about it. She's like, let's go. And you're like,
Okay.
what just happened? What just happened?
You're like, wow, they spent money on that.
It's been,
Like,
and it's Dave Filoni, who I think is just as much as a genius as George Lucas when it comes to the mythos of Star Wars. Like he understands the characters. He wrote and directed and created Ahsoka. So it's moments like that where I feel they dropped the ball.
right.
Uh, you know, like where you're saying this story needs to be told, and to get that kind of diversity, and to get those kind of strong, amazing, in-depth characters, and just
Yeah.
drop the ball on it. uh I hate when they do that. Because like you said, people want to see those stories, they want to read those stories.
Yeah.
Like 12 Years a Slave, people wanted to see that's a story that needed to been told.
Right.
uh I think it's interesting that after he was freed, he was enslaved again, and they didn't tell that story. They left that out at the end with the thing because he
I
like
didn't
years.
see it.
Yeah, it's about a wealthy a black character who had a family, and he was well established in the North, and he was a talented musician, and he was a part of the upper nobility community in America, and somebody betrays him, and basically he ends up in slavery for 12 years, and he finally gets out, and he sees his family, and it's very emotional.
Right.
Uh, but they end, you know how like sometimes in like based on real stories they do like the writing like blah blah blah,
Oh yeah,
Solomon.
yeah, yeah.
But I looked into the story because it had moved me in the movie, so I was like, I want to learn about this guy, and that's the power of art, right? It makes you
Right.
moves you to
Right.
embrace those things. And I read that he actually ended up being enslaved again twice in his life after that. I could be wrong. It might have been just stuff I was reading that was, it's the internet. So things could be wrong, but it was just interesting that they were like that this poor guy got, you know.
I feel like I know who you're talking about, but I can't remember the name.
Yeah, it's his last name's Solomon. He's right, Solomon from 12 years a slave.
Yeah, I always
Uh
wish they would yeah, add a little bit at the end of some movies like that where you're like, okay, this is like a real thing though. Like, can we have the follow up? No.
yeah, like I want them to be, look, it's a happy ending.
Yeah.
Not really, because this is the reality of it. Like you don't have to make it a
Right.
happy ending.
Right.
Like what's that movie with oh man, she's an amazing actress too. I don't know. It was the Woman King, or the
I haven't seen that one either, but I want to see that one.
yeah, but like they glorify and bring the hope to that story, and they bring out elements that you're like, this is amazing. But then you find out when you do your research that they were like leaders of the slave trade. Like that's where their wealth came from and their power, and that's the part that kind of like throws me off. Like I'm like, it's okay to show the darkness or the depth of these cultures, because even the Romans raped kids. Like I want to know that, because I don't want to rape. I want to learn from history.
Right.
And if that disgusts me, when I learned the Romans closely knitted to the Sicilian, like
Right.
that upsets me. I will do what I can to make sure I do not allow that to be embraced into the future. Like
Yeah,
it's
I mean it's really true because I mean you think about pirates too, or and everyone's
pirates.
like, yeah, pirates, and then you learn some shit about pirates, and you're like, damn, they're kind of fucked up.
Let's cut off our arms and legs and play pirates. Yeah, they weren't, and then you hear the great story. You're like, oh, there was a woman pirate. She was the most fearsome woman pirate. But then you read what she did, and you're like, she's still a pirate. Like, she was still a pirate. Like, we shouldn't be honoring that. She cut heads off, of people just sailing.
Yeah.
They were like, I just want to go to this other area. And they were like, you have money. And you're like, she's so strong. She killed people. It's like looking at Ted Bundy and being like, he's my hero. He was so smart. He was a lawyer and he did it.
Oh
like, no, he's a serial killer. But he was smart.
Right.
His family loved him. He was a serial killer. Yeah, but
and there's people like that too.
Yeah. Yeah, they glorify. Imagine that. You're like, oh, it's like, you look at Caesar, you're like, Caesar was so powerful and so smart. He's crazy, right? No, but he ruled the empire. His own people killed him. Why? He was so good. Like he helped people because he was crazy. How was he crazy? He conquered lands. That's yeah, but he made the Roman Empire. Like, I understand the accomplishment. But like again, it's like when I watched Rome, like the show Rome, at least they didn't glorify Caesar. They showed the downside of being Caesar, and because that's the reality of it. I mean, obviously it was artistic freedom, but that's the truth of it. Even war, like the North and South is I mean, I went to school in the South, and I literally talked to people and said, "Oh, the Civil War wasn't about slavery." I was like, I feel like you're not reading books, but I feel they're like, "No, it was about land and power." Yeah, slavery. and but like even that, like the North fighting the South and the South fighting the North, like yeah, it ended up the North winning, and it was for the right reasons. But it's still like it's crazy that it exists, and we shouldn't clean that story up. Like we should understand the horrificness of it, just so we don't make the same mistake of thinking A, owning people, and two,
Right.
B, like if we're a nation, we should be a nation. We should be helping one another, not fighting one another and killing our, because they literally killed brothers, like people from the South and the North. They were brothers and they had to
Yep.
kill each other.
Yeah.
And that's because you had to pick a side, or you'd have to,
Yep.
and it's just like, I sorry, I get passionate about like
No, but it's true. I hate when people do water down these things, and I'm like, okay, but these things happened, and they're lessons.
yeah.
Like, why are you trying to make it like this Disney movie?
Right? Like, why is Genghis Khan the hero?
There was a rainbow.
Yeah, but Mulan was really strong as a woman. Yeah, but there was still a lot of murder going on.
Damn.
You know. All right, so normally we do about an hour, but I enjoyed talking with you. We went over,
Yeah,
but
I had a great time.
yeah. Excellent time. I like to ask everyone the same question at the end of every episode. I'm going to put it on the screen, but I will read it, and then this question has to do with writing, but I'm going to change it for you. Okay. So, what is one piece of advice you discovered about creativity, okay, either through someone else or yourself, that completely changed the way you approach the creative process?
I think for me, it would be letting go of perfectionism.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That
But
is
you
a
are perfect.
stage.
You're perfectly imperfect. You're just a wonderful.
Right, that's what makes us human, though, is we're not perfect. We're not supposed to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference in wanting to do a good job and show making something so amazing, and just being in that cage of, oh no, I can never release this, or I can't even start it because I'm so overwhelmed because everything has to be perfect.
Yeah.
That's never gonna it's never gonna happen. Nothing's gonna be perfect. The time is now. You just have to do it, and if you make something, the best part is you can always improve. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're taking photos and you're like, I don't like those, cool, try again tomorrow. If you write something, you can go back and be like, okay, but I do like these pieces of it, and then improve on that.
Yep.
You just gotta do it. You just gotta do it.
Yeah, like I tell writers all the time, I go, look, when your first draft is done,
Yeah.
that's saved forever.
Yeah.
So now work it, play
Yep.
with it, try things, because it won't change the fact that the first version that you have exists.
Yeah.
So now and it's the same thing with music. When I was in the music industry full time, like people were like, well, this is how I wrote it. And it's like, yeah, but have you worked it? No, this is exactly what I wrote. And I'm like, well, songs are great because they're willing to tinker with them. They're willing to experiment. No. It's exactly how I want it. And it's like there's no great artist accepts the first version of what they create.
Right.
They're always willing to play with it. And I think greatness comes from destruction and the ability to say it's not perfect and challenge your comfort zones. And so I love that.
I agree. I have some songs that I wrote years ago.
Yeah.
And at the time it was just, not what I wanted.
Yeah.
But now when I revisit them, I think about them in a totally different perspective and different way. And I'm like, oh, you know what? No, I do want to change the instrumental. I do want to have more of this or that.
Yeah. Now, with that said, though, Power Glitch 87, the mind of Power Glitch 87, do you now look at the new stuff you write and use that hindsight and go, how would I feel about this in 10 years? Like,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like, because you
Yeah.
listen to your oldest stuff and you're like,
Yeah.
man, I'm definitely changing this. But then you listen to new stuff and you're like, this is great. I'll play
Yeah.
with it. But do you
Yeah.
still have that thought, like, what would this feel like to me in 10 years? And
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes I will be working on something and I'm like, I don't have the skills right now to make this what it could be. But yeah, in 10 years. But I'm like, I don't want to sit on that for 10 years. But that's the great thing is like I could release a song right now and then literally no one is like, you could never release that again or do a different version.
That's right.
It's like, no, I can revisit everything. These are my creations. I can do whatever the hell I want with them. So
I mean, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, by her hand, was rewritten after it had already been published for a few years. She
right.
changed it up and republished it. Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, then wrote Lord of the Rings, and realized the addition of Gollum and the darkness of the Ring trilogy gave him the inspiration to go back and rewrite The Hobbit, specifically the Gollum moments, to maintain the consistency of the novel, and then he republished it.
Yeah.
So if those people, the names that molded writing,
yeah.
it's but I love hearing like an older band like a Black Sabbath re-releasing a song, but like working it. Megadeth did it. Like, that's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, so you're 100% right. I think that's some amazing advice. The don't accept perfection as the be all end all, and also release what you love, knowing you can change it in the future. Like, it's not beholden to well, the world knows, so I can't change it.
Well, the secret's out.
Yeah, that's like you taking a photo and going, well, I can't take another one.
Yeah, I already have a picture of a rainbow. I can never take another one ever again in my life.
I wore blue in this one photo, so I can't,
Yeah, exactly. You can do whatever you want to do. It's your art. And as people, we're constantly adapting and changing and growing, and our perceptions of things change, and we learn. So do what you want. Like,
yeah. I mean, my back pain is different than it was when I was younger, so I changed the way I walk. No.
Yeah. I felt that.
Yeah. I make love on my back now. that's the age I'm at. Like my girlfriend says, like, but we both make love on our backs. I go, that's why we hold hands and watch television now. That's the best we're getting at our age, We look at each other, we're like, yeah, and then we're like, I didn't take my Tylenol today.
Right. A little CBD, some Tylenol, maybe a little Advil in there too.
A little Advil, I need it all. I think we can kiss now. Right. I think making out is okay.
Right.
Maybe we'll kiss our hands and then do a high five.
You gotta stretch first.
I tell people I have to think long and hard to get up out of bed. Like, at my age, I'm like, do I want to risk twisting an ankle?
Yeah.
I gotta go downstairs.
Yeah.
But when you're young, though, you're just like, I'm gonna jump off these stairs 12 feet. It's 18 feet down. You roll. You're like, oh, that was so funny. Now, walking down those steps is scary.
It's so true. I was always getting wrecked, doing nothing as a child, and it was fine. And then now I sneeze and my back is out for 2 weeks, and I'm just like,
your back goes out, you shit your pants.
Yeah.
What's going on? Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Good. I could cancel my plans at least. Yeah. That's the beauty of age. Yeah, I sneezed, so I'm not making it today.
Yeah. And I really have had to do that too, from sneezing.
Yeah.
It was awful.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's like I love pizza because, I'm Sicilian, which is interesting because I don't like Sicilian pizza. I like Napoleon pizza, Napoletano, the round, and Pali Italiano, per favore, so, but like at my age, it's like I have to think about it. I was like, how far from my house toilet am I?
Yeah.
Which A, I realize I just made it so no woman will ever find me attractive with that statement. And B, and also the back thing. They're like, you just lay there? I was like, you would too at my age.
You would too.
I remember when I walked up the hill both ways.
Yeah.
We had one sneaker for the entire town. Yeah. Not sneakers.
Just one.
A sneaker. Just one. So Power, let's do it. Let's how can the fans of the show find you, and what is it they can find?
If you want to find me on social media, just look up Power Glitch 87. You can also find my music on all platforms, Spotify, all of the good stuff. You will find some magical talks, tarot, my cosplay, modeling, and some of my music and chaos, because sometimes I post stuff that I'm like, why did you post that? But it's okay. It's okay.
It's like that photo shoot you and I did where we killed Barney, the dinosaur. Chaos, pure chaos.
It was beautiful.
For anyone listening, if you're not watching, Power Glitch is the words; they're separate, and then 87 is the number. It's just 8 and 7, so it's Power space Glitch space 87. Just for anyone who's listening to the radio and you're like, I need to listen to a Power Glitch. I got to go to Spotify. She has 2 songs up right now, both very exciting. You can move and you would glitch listening to it. Your body glitches into this locomotive movement. And you start just shaking, the rump. I love shaking my rump. Don't get me wrong. Mostly up here in my head, because again, I don't want to pull my knees or something.
Don't want to break something.
But I do have to say thank you so very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Your time. Oh, it's my pleasure. We had a good time. Talked about some interesting topics, fun topics, controversial topics, but we did it in an adult way, which is the purpose of conversation. And growth. Yeah, you can't grow without discussion, and sometimes we're wrong when we have thoughts, and sometimes we're right. But the purpose is to listen, to hear, not to speak. And I feel we did that today, and I'm appreciative for that. So to everyone out there, as always, keep developing the right mindset. I'll see you next time. Bye.